Good morning, everyone. So maybe we can start a bit slowly as more people tune in. But yeah, thanks for taking the time out. I think that's the best part of doing like the first session in the day. If it's good, great start. If it's bad, you forget it early enough. So yeah, so today I'm going to talk about the dark side of a case study, and what I mean by the dark side is like usually you go to these conferences, and I've been to so many. You walk through a case study, and sometimes it just feels like you don't learn anything, because you have these frameworks that you read about, but you don't hear about the messy details, right, of how decisions were made. So this is my attempt to shed some light on a case study and show some things and how we decided on things that mattered eventually. Also, the client that I'm presenting today is Lifesum, which is a health and fitness tracking app, and the CMO is there, by the way, at the bottom, at the last row. So he will call bullshit if I say something wrong. A little bit about myself. So I am a subscription consultant. I have worked with the apps listed here. I also have a podcast called LTV Talks. So definitely check it out. But what I've realized is like most brands struggle to prove ROI with their CRM tools. So my job is to usually come in and sort of help the teams orient themselves with projects and initiatives that actually drive impact quickly and reliably. So over the next 40 minutes or so, I have like three major key points that I wanted to talk about today. One is that CRM is an enhancer for business impact. And what I mean by that is usually, most brands or most CRM teams don't realize that they can drive a lot of business impact and they can actually enhance their whatever metrics they're working towards beyond conversions, right? So oftentimes CRM is restricted to, hey, help us drive conversions through promotions or through whatever it might be. And rarely do teams go beyond that, right, to engagement and retention, because those are the longer term bets, right? So with this case study, I'm going to try and show you how we did that, like how we went beyond conversions to try and prove out impact on engagement and retention. The second one is, even if teams do focus on conversions, a lot of CRM teams, struggle to prove impact. So they would run a series of tests, they would run a series of campaigns, but oftentimes, if you ask them after a few months, like what the impact was, it's still vague at best, right? So there's a lot to be said in CRM to how do you actually prove impact. So with this case study, I'm also going to show you some tidbits on like how we went about proving impact. And the one thing that I'm going to call out here is holdout groups. So that's the one thing that we'll focus on a little bit as well. And finally, this is something that's getting lost more and more with CRM projects, which is like we forget that it's actually a blend of, and it's amazing. I think that's why I love being in this space, because CRM is like the perfect blend of using data, using technology, using the tools that we have, and then combining it with user psychology so that you still need to be creative at the end of the day. You can't be, a machine about it. How many of you, by the way, know Lifesum? Okay, so we need some more marketing to happen. But yeah, Lifesum is a health and fitness tracking app. So, you can log your food, you can log your exercise. And the idea is that it helps you get healthier with logging, and it gives you meals, recipes to help you achieve a healthier lifestyle. What we did there is, it was an onboarding program, which was essentially a 14-day onboarding program where, it was like a starter kit. Users, once they download the app, they have to go through 5-6 steps. And if they go through these steps, we basically were positioning it as it's going to help you, achieve your health goals better, right? So, and we saw a 2x improvement in M1 retention via CRM. So whatever impact we were creating via CRM, we actually doubled it with this project. All of this was done without any native product build. So all of this was done just via CRM, and we combined 4 channels: in-app messaging, email, push notifications, and something called content cards for some of you who don't no praise. It's an in-product channel, and we used a combination of all of them to give a user experience which doesn't feel like it's not built natively. And by the way, no one complained, right? That's one of the biggest thing I hear when I propose these kind of projects is like, oh, doesn't it feel that it's not product built? So wouldn't people complain about it, or wouldn't people notice it? But the answer is actually no. I have done this so many times now, and I have never seen people complain about it. Cool. So with that, we are going to get there, and I'm going to walk through the journey of how we did this experiment through 3 steps, right? So first is, how did we decide to actually focus on onboarding and activation? Second is, how did we actually then decide on an idea and executed the idea? And third is, how did we then measure to prove impact to business leaders, right? To also make it into something that was valuable for the team moving forward. So it was not like a one slide that never got shared, but it's something that the business can value and look at. The first part is just deciding where to focus on. So now, I'm going to do a quick quiz check, right? Which is, New Year is one of the most, the highest season for any health and fitness app, right? It's basically, it covers most of the resolutions that people make are around health and better health choices, being healthier, losing weight, whatever it might be. So it's a peak season for all health and fitness apps. Now, my question to all of you is, if someone comes to you, right? Like if the CMO comes to you and says, hey, this is the peak season, I know we are going to get a lot of conversions, but the acquisition is expensive because a lot of other apps are also bidding on the same users. What would you focus on, right? So that's my question to all of you. Maybe raise hands if you've already had enough coffee. Conversions, how many of you would think, let's focus on conversions. We are paying so much to get these users in. At the least, we should make the more money out of it. Anyone? 1 or 2? Okay. You can't cheat, by the way. It's a case study on activation and engagement, but okay. So how many of you would focus on activations? Okay, perfect. What about onboarding? Nice. And how many would focus on redirection? Because eventually New Year is New Year's for all the users who downloaded the app at some point, right? No one. Crazy. Okay. So and this is very typical, right? We always focus on conversions. Onboarding is a very interesting one because most teams who focus on onboarding struggle to find and measure impact via onboarding that happens all across the board. We decided to focus on activation and onboarding. But the bigger question here is, we did focus on those areas, but why did we do that, right? And that's where I feel we need to challenge ourselves as CRM professionals, that you need to understand that why and that answer to why in a bit more deeper way, right? And this is the first thing I would like to talk about, right? This is just understanding CRM leverage. So what I mean by that is, if you look at any CRM for model for subscription apps, you have these very concrete life cycle stages, right? Like we get people in, we activate them, we onboard them, we engage and retain, we convert, etc., right? But the idea is, how many of us know how sensitive are those metrics to our efforts? So if you work on that metric via CRM, how big of an uplift can you get out of those initiatives? That answer is rare to get out of a lot of brands, right? And that's the position where we need to be. But if you want to get there, what you need is to understand, for example, our current onboarding efforts, right? How big of an uplift does it create on M1 retention? I don't know if any of you works directly in CRM, knows this answer very quickly, but this is very rare to get. If you are in one of those, you're a lucky person. We saw, for example, that in month 1 retention, our onboarding, which was not optimized for month 1 retention, was already creating a good uplift. So we had a 5% uplift over a holdout group, and it was a good enough uplift for CRM efforts, to be honest. Another reason why we didn't focus on conversions is that conversions have lower and lower gains with more and more effort you put in. So it's not, conversion is one of the metrics that we found that if we've sent one email and then we sent 3 emails, the incremental effect that we got out of sending those 2 emails was not high enough. So in health and fitness apps, that's another, like maybe a vertical specific trend, that you have most of the conversions that happen impulse, right? So your New Year resolution is to lose weight. You download the app, you pay. And then there's this sort of long tail of conversions which come later and later. And we found that we couldn't impact that long tail in a much bigger way. So the idea was that probably these users are going to come in and they're going to download the app and they're going to download a bunch of solutions. But if we onboard them well enough in the first 2 weeks and give them a good experience, they're much more likely to stick with us. So that's how we decided to focus on onboarding and activation. And the way we drew these results were through holdout groups, right? And another question for all of you is, how many of you who work in CRM or who work with CRM teams have holdout groups in place right now? Very nice. How many of you have them but also look at them regularly? That's a client of mine, by the way. And then how many of you have not have no holdout groups but have not heard about them either? All of you have heard about them. And no, but you would love to. Okay. And then there are some non-responses, but I'm going to take that as no, we don't have them, but you would love to. Perfect. So that's the case for a lot of us, right? And I think in CRM, there are, this is the second key concept that we need to know. So if we know what, if we want to get to a point where we know where our leverage is and we can focus better, we need holdout groups. But there are 3 things that I often see people get wrong about holdout groups. And so I'm going to just spend a few minutes there talking about it. So the first one is holdout size, right? Most companies I work in have a holdout group of 1% or 3% or 5%. And usually you see these numbers then fluctuate a lot, because you will see 1 week holdout groups are overperforming test. 1 week you see holdout groups are underperforming the test, and that's the week you report on, by the way, typically. And that's everyone's doing that, right? But what we forget is there's a huge component of variance here. So when you have a 1% holdout group, the problem is that you have all these users coming in, and this 1% user is or user base is very under or overrepresented given the cohorts you're receiving. So it might happen that in some weeks you have way more male users coming in this 1% cohort, that 99%, because of the size of it, is a much more well-balanced cohort. So you don't see those numbers fluctuating a lot. So you want to be careful about what size of holdouts you want to go for. You can opt for 1 to 10% of holdouts, but those are typically reserved for people who have, or apps that have huge audience, right? So that's one aspect of holdout groups that you definitely need to check into, which is just holdout sizes and variance. The second is refreshing the holdout group is even more vital. So let's assume this, right? Let's assume you are in the holdout group and it is New Year's. You downloaded the app. You were so motivated that you went on and you took up a trial. And then you paid for the app.
I was like, that's
now,
fine.
the question is, versus a test group user who we had to nudge so hard to get to a trial or to a premium, the comparison is not valid, right? Because you have these holdout groups which are super intrinsically motivated, and you have these test groups who are sort of artificially manipulated or motivated to get to that stage. So if you don't refresh your holdout groups, the problem is that more bottom funnel you get, the more issues you will get proving impact versus a test group. The third one is just the baseline holdout group, right? So what I mean by that is most apps that implement a holdout group will remove any comms for the holdout group, which is usually a bad practice, right? Because that's basically us intentionally giving these users a really bad experience. And so yeah, so that's something that we need to also keep in mind, that these holdout groups are not people who you should give a bad experience to. It's users who you need to at least give a decent experience to, because you are measuring uplift over what we used to have versus what we can do with these new efforts.
Yeah, I need to figure it out. We might be in probably similar.
So that's what we decided on. We decided that the holdout groups for this project is going to receive a bunch of comms across all channels. It's going to be a mix of feature adoption, engagement campaigns. So the holdout group, if you were in the holdout group, you didn't receive comms from Lifesum, right? You would receive a lot of comms. It was still a good experience, but we wanted to understand, okay, was it worth spending 3 months of all of our time to get this project up and live, and does it create impact that's worthy of that effort?
Yeah.
For anyone who wants to read more about holdout groups, this is, and you have time for only one article, this is the article you should read. This is from the guy called Sean Wheeler, who's a co-founder of AMP. And you should definitely read this article. I think he's the best data scientist who translates everything to marketing. So I would highly encourage this. Sorry. Do you want to go for it? Perfect. So now we have made 2 decisions in this sort of first phase, right? One is that we have decided that we want to focus on activation and onboarding. And we have also decided what the holdout experience is going to look like and what are we going to measure it against. So for the next stage, the idea was, okay, now we know where we want to focus, but what do we do about it, right? Like, what should we do in the onboarding and activation stage? So this is where usually teams have 4 or 5 ways of going about finding ideas. One is you go through to funnel reports, retention reports, take a very quantitative approach. The second is you go through a qualitative approach, which is more like you read App Store reviews, you dig into UX research, UI research, whatever it might be, to find insights that might help you with coming up with the project idea. And the third is you dog food. By the way, how many of you actually use your own product regularly? Okay, that's a decent number of people. And I think doing that with your team when you're coming up with ideas is revolutionary. Because that just changes the level of ideas that come in. Sometimes we take our own app for granted, and I highly encourage this method as well. And then finally is just past experiences and industry best practices, right? We see something that is working in conferences like these, and we take it back to the team, and we think we should do something about it. So just as a quick check, how many of you go with a very quantitative approach, or you see your teams going for a much more quantitative approach? A couple. Qualitative? Very nice. What about dog fooding and just internal use? Very nice. And what about best practices then? Is that okay, pretty cool. So it's a divided room. We went for past experiences and industry best practices. And there's honestly no good reason for that. It was just that, I had been part of a lot of good projects where I saw a lot of impact. The product team wanted to do something with gamification, so there was a lot of interest there. And so we decided we'll go with industry best practices. But it can get confusing, right? Because as soon as you decide you want to do gamification and you Google that, you will see just the insane amount of use cases. You can do things which are incentive-based checklist. You can do checklists which are just open-ended, so it has no end. You just need to go through the order. There are badges, achievements. There are things that will help you achieve goals if you finish them. So, there are literally countless opportunities. One thing that we did do with Blinkist at some point, with Micah and Yelena sitting here, is we introduced something called Blinkist badges, which had a 300% increase in premium user engagement just based on start sessions. And that's, by the way, that's something that I spoke about at a conference last year. So if you scan that, you'd get taken there. But yeah, so I have seen this happen with Blinkist. I've seen this with Blacklane, which is another app, and we saw a really great impact. So I knew with some confidence that there is something, lying here that we could potentially use for Lifesum as well. And I want to give a big shout out to the team, right? Because just going to your team and saying, I have seen it work and it should be something that we could work on is only half the job done, right? You need a team that supports You need the leadership who supports these kind of ideas. And Anna, who is the director of product marketing at Lifesum, was super encouraging with these new ideas. She was all for it, ready to get you some resources. Christian was another big operational support. So you need very capable team to execute on these kind of creative projects. And I think that's what we had at Lifesum as well. So now we knew that we wanted to focus on an onboarding checklist program. And there was a lot of work that had to be done just to find out how many items need to go in there, what should the items be. And that's one of the biggest problems with gamification, is that when brands start with this project, they rush into it and they get a badges program up and running that users don't care about. So there's a lot of great research on, just open up Google Scholar. There's just insane amount of research on gamification and what is good reward. Typically, you want to aim for a 3 to 5 amount of things that a user does. We hacked a correlation analysis. So we had no access to like crazy advanced analytics. So we just took few cohorts of users, tested how they were performing, which actions they were doing that were related to retention, that were related to conversions. And we tried to at least make sense of some data. And the biggest point I want to call out here is that sometimes you just need that intuition, but you need to back it with as much data as you can. So, and that's what we were doing here. We didn't have a data scientist validating our sample sizes, right? Or it was not something that was very data-driven in that sense. But you need to be data-driven enough to back all your decisions with enough data so that you know you're directionally going in the right way. We saw, for example, this notification, which was like a streak notification. We didn't have any streak programs or anything. We just tried this out, and it had one of the highest open rates than any other campaign that we had launched by that point. So we knew we were on the right track with the gamification approach. To avoid frameworks for the dark side of a case study, I haven't attached any other frameworks, but this is the one that I use regularly for reward programs. And I honestly created this for this post, which was, it's an NCAM, which is essentially if you're doing any gamification project, what you want to focus is on new beginnings. So you want to reward users or punish users for new beginnings. You have consistency. So you want to reward users for being consistent with what they were supposed to do. There's achievements, which is a user-centric approach. So you're saying, what does the user feel is an achievement? Not what you and your product team feels like an achievement, right? And then is milestones, which is much more business-centric. So if you achieve 10 food logs in a day, that's a business-oriented goal. We don't necessarily know it's an achievement for a user. So those are the 4 components. You can definitely read more about it here. The last part on this is like, we also, because we had the idea, we knew what we were doing, we had the top 4 actions. Just getting product team involved here was such a big help. And you will see, right, like this looks really bad, I think. But we started with it. We started creating some mockups. And that's what we were going to do if we didn't have product help, which got us to that stage, right? And you see some small elements that have changed, which is, the tick mark. So it looks like a much better experience. We optimized the copy with a little bit of help from product teams. So these are the types of benefits you can get if you are also, while you're making this project, you're getting more and more teams involved who can lend resources that they are very skilled at. So we got from there to this design just because the product designer had a couple of days to work on this and was curious about how to do it. So that's where we are, right? Like we decided we want to do this. We added a bunch of things on the checklist. And then finally, we also used some data and creativity to back up everything that we were doing. And we got to execute the campaigns. After it was launched, the final step is how did we then actually report on it? And this is where I would love to like alert all of you, right? When you go through a case study, I can't tell you how many times we report on things that are not measured accurately. And that's one of the biggest pitfalls when you listen to best practices and case studies. And I might be doing it wrong as well, by the way. Feel free to call me out. But I think this is the best approach I have found. And essentially, what we did and what you should do if you had one of these projects are those kind of 3 things, right? One is you want to be looking at risk metrics. So you want to know that your whatever impact you're driving doesn't drive a negative impact on some of the other key metrics like uninstalls or unsubscribes. So if we were doing this gamification approach, we were literally doubling how many comms we were sending to users at any given day. That meant that there was a huge risk of unsubscribes, uninstalls, which we really didn't want to have. So that's something that we had to monitor and report on. No one typically would ask you for these metrics, and in my case study, I would love to not show them. But because we didn't have a negative impact, it's worth checking it out. Second is sample size. So Optimizely has this really good calculator that you can use, which is free, and it tells you what sample size per variant do you need if you want to run an experiment that is rooted in data science, right? Like you want to know that whatever significance you're getting it correctly and at the right time. You can't report on things when things are looking great, right? You need to wait a certain amount of time to get that result, and you need to wait for that. So that's the third main insight that I have is like, don't conclude your test too quickly. So in January, we have all these users who are super highly motivated. The holdout group was receiving something, but these highly motivated users, we were giving a checklist, and the uplift was almost double of that, to be honest. But we needed to measure that on each and every cohort across February, March, when things get rough, when people are not as motivated, to see if the program had the legs to still drive retention, right? So you need to have a longevity component to it. Otherwise, it doesn't create long-term sustainable business impact for your company. So that's the final point. I think you need to make sure the report stands the test of time and the test of data science. And so next time, I hope when you're listening to a case study, you can sort of focus on these three areas, which is just how did they actually came up with the idea, how did they decide to focus, but also how did they go about executing and reporting on it. And just if you spot these good signs of someone saying how did they actually measure incremental effect, that's when you have an actual case study. Please be aware of case studies that are presented without them. And that's it. And you can get the slides here, by the way. Thank you so much.